Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 13 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
My name is Felix Pastorius, and I play the electric bass.
I'm so happy you agreed to do this, Felix. I've been really enjoying your music in a strange way. I had come to the Yellow Jackets way later in life, and for some reason in my sort of streaming world, A Rise in the Road came on, and I started listening to it, and I really didn't make the connection until
Yeah,
I went into the credits, which I'm sure when you speak to someone who knows anything about the bass, it must be astonishing when you hear stories like that.
yeah, for sure. I mean, when I was with the Yellow Jackets, I'm not with them anymore. But when I
Right.
was with them, the connection was still lacking, even in live performance. Sometimes people wouldn't even realize until after the show. But that's okay. That's cool. I mean, but again, that to me, that's kind of the disconnect of idolizing someone. Is a lot of people don't realize that most of these people are family. Have families. Are family people, or their father or brother or sister or an aunt, and it it it's kind of crazy for me for people to think that there's no way. Oh, how could Jocko even have a kid, let alone four children? I don't know. It kind of makes sense to me. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to you because you're one of the spawns for sure.
Yeah, of course, but I mean, everybody has that right, and that's what everybody should do. I mean, it's probably one of the most important decisions anybody can make on this planet is to bear children, have a child, share a relationship with somebody to the point where you want to, have offspring. So I think everybody should do that, or have the opportunity to do that, and especially, not to toot my father's own horn, but a genius should have that right as well.
Do you think
So
part of it is just because he passed so young that it's sort of it's like because in this day and
true,
age, like I started having kids, well past 35 for sure.
right,
Do,
right.
do you think the part
No,
of it
that's
might,
true,
it just might be like what anybody who knew about him knew
right.
was dominated not by the family guy, but by the fact that he was super young.
That's true. And also, I mean, let's not forget, it's, so many years ago since his passing. So you kind of tend to focus on the, the career and what happened to him and how his life changed and, the ending of it all instead of thinking about if there's, because of how disconnected we are so many years later of what possibly could have happened since then. Because to most people's eyes, the finalization, obvious. I mean, it is, the end of my father's life, is the end of his the continuation of his life, which obviously, I'm not my father and none of my siblings are my father, but we carry on his likeness. We carry on what, his blood and his beliefs. And so I don't know.
Yeah,
That might have something to do with it too.
and the story of Jocko, I think, is one that people who are in music, and in particular, I think people who are probably even more on the bass or jazz side, really sort of hold up as this legend myth of who he is and
Exactly.
what he's
Right.
about. What I feel has happened very recently through the work of Robert Trujillo, obviously the Jacko documentary, and is that it's coming to a more mass audience and that the story is being told and that there are people who might have been more on the periphery of the story who are honing in on it and acknowledging it as the greatness of his music and the genius of what he was. And I'm
Mm.
wondering, I was going to get to this later, but I might as well go into it now because you started down the road. Is
Uh-oh.
here we are in the holiday seasons, and the movie just came out. It's always emotional. I'm someone who lost my parent fairly recently. I know you lost your mom as well fairly recently too, and it stays with you in a very powerful way.
Mhm.
Is this part now great that he's being sort of put into the spotlight more, or does it make it hard for you?
I don't know. the lack of having my father in my life for the past 30 years is something I deal with regularly. So the fact that more people are recognizing his greatness, then therefore I have to maybe think or talk about him more. It's not really much different than already my relationship, or what I consider my relationship with my father still. So and I've grown up surrounded by people already. It's not, for the most part, I mentioned this, disconnect sometimes when I'm out on the road. People don't realize who I'm related to. But that's majority of the time, people know who I am. And the majority of the time, people are approaching me to talk about my father continuously. And I get it all, in person or through social media constantly. So the documentary movie, and this push to kind of share our father's story with more people, so they have a better understanding of how and why and what happened. Obviously there are going to be more people involved, but as far as I'm concerned, it's always been this kind of crazy whirlwind of people most of the time, wanting to talk about my father. I think it's a great thing, regardless of, if I think it's a burden or not, having to talk to people or realize, the loss more and more. I still think it's an absolutely wonderful, great thing that people have the opportunity to experience my father in a new way, especially the new generation. There's a ton of amazing musicians and artists, and specifically bass players, obviously, who weren't around when my father was around. Including me to an extent. I was quite young when he passed away.
You were 5 years old. I mean,
right.
I think about, my father passed and my son was actually 5. And right. I'm watching those memories of him and he's now 7. I mean, they fade. And
right.
So I'm happy to hear you say that, Felix, because, when you approach a conversation with someone you've never met, it's awkward. Let's be honest. It's an awkward thing because people want to know, and they want to know your connection, because the bass is now is a primary driver of who you are, and you're developing your own identity. But it's tenuous. Like I was very apprehensive, to be really candid, about like what's your level of comfort, because it's normal.
Right.
I mean, we're humans.
Yeah, I'm pretty apprehensive as well. When it comes,
it's normal.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I think part of it probably is that, because I can see it through my child, that your memories must be very minor almost, because you were so young. I mean, what could you have?
Well, I mean, it was also the time and place as well. I mean, my father was in and out of town quite a bit at that, I mean, up until that point, even, obviously. I mean, he was, he had been a touring musician already for a number of years, but he was also going back and forth with his, bands and various relationships in New York and San Francisco, and back and forth between Florida. So, he wasn't around much regardless. So that on top, it's not fleeting. Most of the memories I've somehow been able to keep a grasp, a hold of them, and I try not to share them as much as possible, just because there are so few,
and they're personal.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Felix, I want to talk about a moment in time in your life, because, as you said, you really grew up in your own world, exposed to music, exposed to art, exposed to creativity, never forced on you, from what I've read. And you can clarify that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You made a proactive choice to go down this road, and again, being a musician in general and choosing the bass.
Yeah.
What was that like for you when you were like, you know what? No, I'm doing this. I'm going to go, and my primary instrument, my primary expression of creativity will be the electric bass.
Yeah. I think I'm still making that choice.
That's a real artist. By the way, that's a great artist line. It's like someone saying, "What's it like to publish 2 books?" I'm like, I don't know if I'm still a writer yet.
No, for sure. I mean, I haven't yet even gotten to the point where I feel that I am truly, I've truly become a bass player. I enjoy playing electric bass. That's what I enjoy doing, regardless if I do it for a financial gain or for notoriety or anything. I enjoy playing bass just because it's fun. It's an artistic medium that I can let loose on, and I would do I'll do at home on my couch for the rest of my life, regardless of what it means to me in a society or social media or whatever. But it was the choice is still being made that there are a few things that I'd rather do, and the fact is I've spent more time on bass than most of my other, I don't want to call it a hobby, but in a way I kind of look at it as something that I just enjoy doing and I get joy out of, again, regardless of financial gain or social media recognition, but I get enjoyment out of it, and that's primarily the focal point for me. As long as I keep having fun, experimenting and trying to figure out how this instrument works, then I'll do it. Yeah.
So when was that moment? When was the moment? I know you're saying you're still making it, but there was a moment where you said,
sure.
"Look,
For sure.
And by the way, let's be really clear. Like I personally have I don't separate one side of being art and the other side being this sort of commerce thing. I think that they're directly together connected, and I think being paid for one's work, which I think is a pure definition of professionalism, is you're being paid for the work you're doing.
Yes.
That I don't.
Yes.
I know some artists sort of really struggle with that. I don't. So when I talk about it, I want you to know that I say it from a very pure, beautiful place, because I look at it like, you know what, Felix, if you're creating something, I want to pay you for that because I want to encourage you so that I can have more, because it's selfish. I want more of your art.
I think though the angle that I was trying to get at a little bit more was just from the pure fact that it would have been very easy for me at any point to jump on the Pastorius train and bass train and say, I'm a Pastorius playing bass, pay me regardless of what I'm doing, how it sounds or whatever, how I look or how I carry on my family's name. I look at, to me, that's the furthest thing from music. So that's kind of more the angle I was looking at. But I agree, of course. I mean, beautiful representations of new ideas should be admired and should be, financially, given, supported, and
on social media too, the views and the likes and the shares and the comments are a form of acknowledgement. I mean, I create things, you create things. We want, most people, I think, want the acknowledgement of the work. It's like a normal human thing.
Yeah, of course.
So when you look at that, I'm really fascinated by the way you're choosing your words and talking about it, because there was one side of me that was like, it sounds like Felix is like me, and that's the whole imposter syndrome. Like someone's going to walk in and be like, come on, Mitch, like, come over here. You're not really that guy. But the other side that I'm actually thinking I'm feeling more, and you can correct me on this, is you're bringing to it not a reverence of the name, but rather that self-humility of you. It sounds to me like you feel like this is, learning is a journey, and you can't say I'm a bass player and suddenly is he as good as Dad, or is he as good as Victor, or whoever else it might be, because you're in the experience of trying to figure out exactly what that voice of your art is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to be better, regardless of who my father is. I'm not trying to be better than anyone else. I'm just trying to be the best version that I can possibly be of myself. Granted, it's a nice focal point to be able to strive for greatness, based on existing versions of whatever path you're on. And granted, obviously one of them was my father. But at the same time, I see music and I see art as a very personal thing and it's really hard for me to compare even the greatness to a child.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
it's
so do you,
completely unique. It's entirely unique to oneself.
yeah.
To
And
me,
so when you look at it, I'm curious because I sort of always try and it's like walk a mile in that person's shoes, which is such an impossible thing to always do. But
right?
when I think about you and what you do, the sort of note that I wrote to myself is there is this unfair expectation, but that unfairness could be a positive or negative. And I guess it feels to me like that's something you reconcile with as well. It's like, look, I'm not going to come out here and try. Nobody could ever come out here, regardless of last name or lineage, and say that
Right.
they are better than somebody that most of us literally put up on a mountain. And
Yeah.
we don't have, and it's not like Mount Rushmore where we got four. There's
Right.
one.
Yeah.
And that makes
Exactly.
it, that makes it hard. Do you look at
Right.
it and say, I have to do this, but I have to do this knowing full well that to me it's an unfair expectation to expect that it would be if you picked up a paintbrush or anything else, it
Yeah.
would be hard to do.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It. I. I take. I take it though with a grain of salt, and I go into it knowing that I I can survive. I can get through on the other end of this whole. Because the other thing is, it's not just people expecting me to do something, but a lot of times, not not all the time, but there are moments where people expect me to actually, in a way, even be my father, to take up the slack that that's been missing, since his passing, in terms of being that guy on stage, or however, that there I meet people constantly who are still greatly affected by my father and what he did. And I've actually even had people walk up to me and call me Jocko. And it's really quite interesting. and
Yeah, and
I
that's what I mean by unfair, right? It's like it's unfair, and deep down inside they probably know it too. Like it's such I don't know if it's the word stupid, but it's like a stupid presumption almost.
right. It is absolutely. It's completely unfair. It's idiotic, 100%, for them to even put another human being in someone else's shoes without even knowing who I am.
Right.
But at the same time, because of the way I was raised, and being familiar with this situation, I still completely can empathize with that position of who that person is, and just the pure, head over heels in love they are with my father and his image and his sound and what he created, and they're just they're kind of
It's a void that we're all looking to fill.
right.
Like
Yeah.
if you love something, like isn't that the complete disappointment of most artists as they get older and they don't deliver on the work they've done before? It's always that
Right.
reliance on that life force of what they were when everybody
Right.
first loved them. And so when they're
Exactly.
not there, that void, I
But
see that side too.
isn't that most relationships though?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, most people look at things from the point of what fit their what their needs and what they wanted at that time and place, and they idolize that whole situation in that period of time. And regardless of how people change, because we all change and things happen, they're always going to be looking back at that other place and time. And definitely, I don't know. A lot of artists have been having to deal with that for a long time.
Sure. It's part of the emotion of what an artist is, because an artist is fundamentally someone who puts their emotions out in a very visual way, I would say, because I even consider music to be visual.
Right.
And so when that happens too, what happens is the people who are taking that art tend to dissect it to try and figure out
Hmm.
either what the subtext is of what the artist meant or what's their own
Right.
interpretation
Oh
of it.
yeah. Oh
Right.
yeah. It's crazy.
Which is
Absolutely.
wild, yeah. I'm really interested in how you see the bass. And now I'm going to compliment you for just being you, which is I had a sort of gap in the instrument in terms of playing it and being involved in it. And the gap was quite a significant amount of years. I went about my business and did what I did. And recently with this podcast and No Treble, I've reintroduced myself to the love that I have for this instrument, the artists who create on it, and the music. And when I came back, I was like, wow, modern bass playing is very different. It really is about 5 and 6 strings. It is about different types of instrument. The physicalness of this electric instrument had changed so dramatically. How people play on it had changed so dramatically. And when I look at what you're doing, I really do see you as being almost a pure definition of a modern electric bass player. I think about the fact that you've got 6 strings, that you're very, very in tune with melody, and by that I mean the sort of chording of how you approach this instrument. What do you want to bring to this instrument on your journey?
I think excuse me. I think the most important attribute I can bring to music, well, first is just me trying to somehow feel fulfilled in my own endeavors, and hopefully that at the same time is a way, and ultimately is a way for the instrument to grow and to progress, and for arts and music, period. I mean, I'm not trying to say that I will do anything like that. I am, smart enough to do anything like that. I just hope that something like that can happen. I mean, in a day and age where we're constantly changing outside of music and the arts, the world is changing so rapidly in medicine and technology, to the point where it's even being almost kind of reinvented, or science, and it's growing so fast. Music is definitely, for sure, in a way as well, but I would hope that I could be a part of a new expansion, maybe somewhat similar to my father, but in a different way. I'm not saying like redefining the electric bass. I mean music, period, art, period. Be a part of something that is a new leap, a new progression, a new place, because a lot of what we do still to this day, even though it's become more proficient, and bass players are more proficient than ever before, there are so many amazing bass players that are already capable of playing everything my father did, if not better than him in a lot of ways, all over the world. Little kids that are learning all my father's tricks and licks, and songs. But in a lot of ways, that is obviously affirmation of my father's greatness and how much he has influenced and will continue to influence the world of music. But it isn't necessarily a progression of music or the arts in a lot of ways. Maybe technique, maybe through the lack of him not being here to be able to show people a lot of things visually, people, having to figure out musicians trying to have to figure out how he created these sounds and play these ideas will, define new techniques for sure. But in terms of breaking new ground and moving in a new direction, it's kind of just repeating the same things that have been done before. It's repeating the genius of something before. It's like if someone kept painting the same Michelangelo painting over and over again. It wouldn't necessarily break new ground.
But to sort of not to challenge that thought, but to put it in a different direction. Absolutely. But we like graffiti, right? So you have a whole new way of using, like, let's call it technology, spray cans. So let's call it technology, the types of bases we're building. But the other part of it is the feel of what you're doing with the physical materials. And again, I just watched the documentary, and if there was one word, I think if we actually did like a word cloud around the words that were used about Jacko, feel would probably be the big blaring word we would see. Oh, yeah. And feel, as you know as an artist, and I know as someone who creates, is, wow, is that personal? Wow, is it hard to do? So when I ask you about this idea of what you want to bring to the bass, there's a technology. You are building and using instruments that we didn't have back then. I mean, I find that mind-blowing to think that your dad, popped the frets out, and that created the fretless electric. It's crazy to me. Right. And in such a short period of time, to watch you playing the instruments you play and others play these types of advanced technologies. Right. But what they're doing with the technology on top of the feel is
Right.
where I think it's getting amazing. So yeah, a million
For
people might
sure.
be able to do Donna Lee, but let's face
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
feel is
It's
pretty
true.
different.
Yeah. No, you're right. And the fact is feel is, you know, it's regardless of how advanced a piece of technology you're playing, feel will trump that every time. Uh, Granted, we are in a situation where we have amazing um, instruments that we can play nowadays that are built to a specific spec that is down to the minute little details of specific woods and electronics and
Space between frets and neck
yeah,
sizes and things that I
absolutely.
never would have even cared about.
Yeah, I know. And to an extent, I didn't really care about for years. For me, the whole idea was just to have an instrument, regardless of what it was, as long as I could play it and it sounded okay, and even if it didn't sound okay, I would try to get a good sound out of it. As long as I had an instrument to play, that was really it for me. The whole, radius and fret size and what kind of strings and nickel or steel. Like I really didn't care about any of that for such a long time because for me it was all about just having an instrument. Period, whatever it was, however it was, and try to get a good sound out of it.
And when I circle back to your work, in my brain I always had a note that like Felix reminds me of like the Jack White of bass,
Oh man,
because it was just like, I'll take a piece of crap string with a bottle, like,
yeah,
but I'm going to try and figure out a sound from it. And that's, again, like I sort of miss that in music, and in particular, I think we're getting a little bit more now with the bass. But to
yeah,
me, when I talk about modern bass players and why I was saying I wanted to compliment you, is I really felt like you were sort of trying to strip a little bit away of that and bring some of that. Let's just get the sounds out of these things, no matter how technically advanced they are.
right. Yeah, you need to. That's for me. That's one. As I continue to try and become an artist and have to find a true voice on this instrument, I get closer and closer to the realization that the relationship that I have with this instrument is so important. The the time and space and the empathy that is required to pull a sound out of this instrument that is true and unique, it is becoming more defined as I spend more time on this instrument. And it's a funny story real quick in terms of you were talking about a string on a bottle and just trying to get a sound out of it. When I first started playing, I would literally grab whatever strings I could find in the house if a string broke or I need to replace a string. And at one point, my father had used to have Rotosound would just send him boxes of strings, and I used to have a small little box of old strings that he had never used, that were still packaged like they were new, but they were like 20 years old at that time, and some of them were rusted, and I would just throw them on there, full on rusted strings, and just play right through it, and just so I could play. That's all it was.
It's a miracle you're alive. Like, you didn't get a staph infection from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like I can imagine you open them up and there was like the rust dust on them.
Oh yeah, it was bad. Yeah, it was bad.
So one of my favorite quotes, because I used to actually write about music and review albums and stuff like that, and I heard a quote, and I don't know who said it, and it's somewhat famous, but the quote was, writing about music is like dancing to architecture. Like, it's a really hard thing to verbalize. And I really sort of kept that quote near and dear to my heart as you're either trying to review an album or speak to an artist. And yet there's this desire in me that wants to ask you this question, which is, how are you able to verbalize things like, this is my creative journey, or this is what I'm trying to do with my music? Or do you really think that like it just comes in what I play, and that question is just, it's an impossibility to answer?
I try my best to answer. Sometimes some days are better than others in verbalizing it. The most obvious way and example a true portrayal of my journey is obviously through my music. I mean, that's one of the greatest things about art, period, and expression, is that there are no ways to lie about who you are through your art. This is who you are. This is what I do. This is how I'm feeling at that moment. Who knows how this would sound, 5 minutes from now or 2 years ago. So, obviously, the easiest way to answer that would be through music and as I'm playing. But even then, I would be in a different mindset just because of the question,
Yeah, and the type of music you're playing and who you're playing
exactly,
with too.
Absolutely.
So this thing called the bass that you and I love. I mean, it's an amazingly fascinating instrument, especially the electric bass, because it's fairly new.
Yep.
It's been innovated maybe a couple of times. It plays a role in a band that has a certain level of cohesion within making a sound and output come out. Your journey has been very much in being a part of something versus taking the instrument and moving it in that solo direction, whether it's, what Wooten has done, Steve Bailey, we can go on and on.
Right.
Is that a conscious decision, or are you sort of just waiting, or are you like sort of, I feel like we're similar ages where it's like, I know you talk about the Chili Peppers and Primus, and for me, it's like, I'm just raising my hands. That's my introduction too.
Right.
But it's like, no, bass for us growing up, you and I, was always about it being a part, but not the only.
Right. Well, I think that's the disconnect with a lot of. I hope that the documentary shows some of my father's side, his upbringing too in music. Is that obviously he changed the world in terms of what a bass player's role is or can be, rather than what it probably should be. But it still comes from his appreciation of the role, of the ultimate role. Of the supportive role, a lot of musicians, a lot of friends of my father's that I've talked to over the years in passing, it's always been they miss his, the best they ever played was when he was on stage, not when he was soloing or when they were soloing. It was just the communicative, just full on group expression as they were playing together. Everybody was just supporting each other, and don't get me wrong. Obviously, I listened to my father quite a bit growing up, alongside Chili Peppers and Primus, and Earth, Wind and Fire and Stevie Wonder. So I did have a pretty good understanding and grasp of what a solo bass album should sound like, or what it is, or the possibilities. But I just don't. In terms of going down that path for myself, I don't know if that's necessarily who I am. It's weird. I never went to school for music, so my approach into learning was through playing, was through gigging, and because of my father, because of who my father was and is, my options for gigging were already immediately kind of dictated into one direction. So if I was going to sit in somewhere, oh, Felix, you're playing bass? Come on, let's sit in. Let's play the Chicken. So immediately I'm playing this song, and then kind of gradually it kept growing into. I'm playing my father's music more and more. Granted, with my friends and family coming up, I was learning other fusion tunes, learning a lot of Herbie Hancock and Return to Forever, and learning some jazz standards. But for the most part, there was a lot of my father's music that was in there. So there was an immediate connection for most people to, see me as maybe a continuation, for lack of a better word, of my father in a lot of ways, because they see me playing bass and all of a sudden playing his music, and maybe it's going to go into this direction. There were a lot of people, even when my father was around, who were hoping for him, he would do another solo bass album, which never happened. Yeah. Obviously, my choice to play music is rarely dictated by personal, I don't know, image, or it's mostly about if this music sounds good, If I feel good about it, if I'm playing good, well, and it's coming together the right way, then that is what it is, regardless of it being a solo album or me playing a two-string tub bass in the back of a bluegrass band. Whatever sounds and feels the best at that moment, for me, is the ultimate path, regardless of me being the continuation or being a solo bassist and standing in the front of the stage and blowing people's minds, which is all great. That's all good too.
I was actually thinking as you were talking, because you mentioned the documentary again, that one of the things that really took me by surprise is the lack of media that there really was on Jacko.
Yeah.
And now there's like tons of images and tons of video footage. And I guess I take it from the perspective of how old we both are, and everything is on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. Yep. And like, I really sort of had to frame in my brain that it wasn't like there was a huge audiences and people loved them, but it wasn't that sort of mass attention where filming that type of content was expensive. And it was amazing. It was amazing to me, and also a bit not disappointing. That's the wrong word, but it's almost like you wanted to hear his voice more, see him a little bit more, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Well, and also if you have to take into account, I mean, it was a very short career.
Time. Yeah, short career. Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, the amount of things that he did was a relatively short period of time. From when his first solo album to actually starting to gain some recognition to getting on the road. By the time he was on the road with Weather Report and really playing and getting out there, it was already almost the 80s. And he was working, and gigging and traveling. So it's to get an interview, isn't as easy, or to get a photo or.
We just didn't have content like we have now, and you sort of take it for granted. That was my one crazy takeaway. It was like so random in my brain, but I was like, it's fascinating that you forget filming videos, doing interviews back then was a costly, time enduring. It wasn't like, hey, I send you a Facebook message on Skype, and Felix and I are on the phone 2 minutes on Skype. 2 minutes later, it would have been like handwritten letters with the horses back then.
Exactly, pigeons. Well, and it's I think we have actually also become somewhat numb because of the amount of media that is available. We're jaded. We take a lot of things for granted. We don't appreciate most. I mean, we do in terms of, I guess, likes and views, but I think it's very. It just passes by so fast nowadays because you're just on to the next thing immediately. Whereas, growing up, I would have to listen to the same CD or the same cassette tape, until it would break because I loved it so much. And maybe I didn't have the finances or the opportunity to get a new album at that time. Whereas now it's like, oh, this song's great, and then I'm on to the next new thing.
I'm curious, as another side of your life, and I'm asking this out of a very naive place, I really don't know. Are you a part of the family in terms of how the family manages what is Jacko's legacy, current types of businesses, opportunities? How does
yes.
That, so that's a job in and of itself then.
Absolutely. When my twin brother and when Julius and I turned 18 and became legal adults, we put into motion to finally have this corporation that would handle our father's likeness and his image and his music and publishing and all that. That's been a family affair now for quite some time. And that's it.
Is it hard work, or is it a real joy?
It's hard occasionally when you have people that want to sample your father's music, and it's not necessarily the type of music that you enjoy so much. I'm not trying to call anybody out, no, but my father was raised Catholic, and if he only knew some of the things that were being said or I'll say rapped over some of his sampled beats, I don't know if he would be totally cool with it. And that's not always great, having to deal with those choices. But it's been a joy. Obviously, we're fortunate. We're very fortunate to be able to still own our father's music. So regardless of how hard it can be or has been, it's obviously a joy because we have it. So.
So with that, Felix, I'm curious, your involvement in the family, what's your personal take on the movie? How did you feel about it?
So my personal take as the movie was being developed was one of um, excitement, um, a little bit of dreading the process somewhat, um, just personally and for the family and what that would entail, uh, um, because of how many people um, we want to have involved. Um, and to try and get the closest representation of our father's life, um, prior to his career, and then a true representation of his career and how it took off. Um, we just wanted to get as much in there, but at the same time, I knew that because of how many people involved, would we ever get to the point where everybody would feel comfortable and would be happy with the product? I'm not saying I would throw anything out there, but I was definitely on the end where I was just like, man, I'm just so excited that there's even going to be a documentary. As much information that we can share with people, let's just get it out there. And if it has to be a 5-part series, then let's make it a 5-part series. But for me, it's been a great opportunity just to share our father. I've seen the movie now, the final cut, 4 times, and it's a little bit hard. I think it's getting easier to watch just for my own. Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, I'm in.
Sorry,
No, it's okay.
sorry, it was quiet outside. I was just hoping that
I'm
it
quiet because
stop
I'm
again.
engaged. I'm engaged in what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Um, uh, for my own feelings, obviously, it's it can be difficult to watch, but sharing it, bringing family and friends, being in the same room. We just had a showing here in New York about 10 days ago, a week and a half ago, um, and having some of the New York friends and family come out and share the moment. It's great. We can all come together and appreciate our father's life in a way that wasn't really available, uh, and needed to be out there. So I'm really happy with what we have. I'm I'm grateful for Robert and for the director Paul Marchand, and in terms of our family's involvement, we've all been involved as much as we possibly can. But our brother John has really taken the reins in terms of being the kind of mediator between the family and the film. So obviously, amazing job that he's done too, and we have something that I think is a really great representation of our father, and I just hope people enjoy it, get a fresh take, get a new understanding, have maybe a little more empathy in their hearts for this genius.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing, and I think empathy is such a powerful word, is that the end it's so complex what happened to him. I mean, yeah, it's a moment in time that was a crime, but there were there were so many angles of it. You could talk about there was health issues, there was addiction issues, there was violent. Like for most people, what I don't think people get is that it's hard for the family and hard for everybody because it wasn't one thing, really. And it's
Right.
it's it's tough. That's tough just on any family. So to sort of relive it and have it not glorified but put on a big screen, it can't be easy.
No, it isn't. Um, I mean, to say it's tumultuous would be a gross understatement.
Right.
That whole thing was
It's a
just a
horror.
whirlwind. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, it's a hard piece to sit through for sure. But at the same time, I feel like it is somewhat medicating. I get to um, you know reconfirm everything and try to make it fit in my head again and understand excuse me, or try to understand the situation as it is. But it is. I think it's healing in a lot of ways, and
it's nice to hear that from you, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah.
It's really nice to hear you say that, like for me, because it can go either way. It can make somebody go in different places. So it's actually really warming as a person who loves what you're doing to hear you say that, just so you know.
Thank you. Yeah. It's the truth. It needs to. You need to face. I mean, those places are defining moments, regardless of who you are. You know, those hard places, you have to face them, and you either come out on the other end or you don't. Well, actually, you always come out on the other end. It's just
how you come out.
Yeah, it's really what matters. But I mean, again, that's defining. You know,
one of the things that I've uncovered as a personal journey, which has been over a year of speaking to amazing musicians like yourself with this podcast, has been how amazingly close-knit this community of players and musicians, bass players, really, really are. And looking at your story, I've heard instances of what Victor Wooten has done for you. I've heard you tell stories in other articles about Bobby Thomas from Weather Report and taking you under his wing. It feels like the community has supported, has also been a part, like the bass playing isn't just you and the instrument and trying to sort of be a part of the legacy of the instrument and the legacy of obviously your father because of what he did for the instrument, but rather the community. And I think that's sometimes an undertold story that I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah. The process, the process of me becoming a musician and having this family like situation in terms of musicians, a musical family, is quite a beautiful thing. You know, I joke about it, but I think, you know, I have like 5 or 6 godfathers because of, you know, my father would just kept bringing them in to the picture. But I've had a great amount of musicians look after me in a very respectful, very honest, you know, to my father way. I think music can be that way and is that way in most ways, and you know, in most circles. I mean, I think we have in not a negative connotation. I know cliques can be that way, but throughout music in this industry, and even in, you know, growing up, wherever you are in Omaha, I mean, you have your circle of friends and people. Granted, you know, I've had the opportunity to be around some really influential and amazing musicians who've been able to be a part of my circle. But again, it's done, and it should always be done in a you know, respectful, very caring way. And I think that's the, you know, the pure heart of what being creative and being an artist and sharing this time and place. It should be that way. Regardless of who you are. And you know, I don't want to talk about financial gain again, but it's never been anything like that. You know, music shouldn't be that. There's the furthest thing from music to me is that in a lot of ways. Granted, you know, I would love to be able to. I know there was a period in time in the Renaissance where you could just get paid to be an artist, which would be great again. You know,
we are sort of getting there. The patron model is sort of coming back. It is.
Yeah, exactly.
It is sort of coming. Last thought I'd love to hear a little bit of commentary on from you is, when I think about people who create music that really inspires me, I'm always curious if it's always derived from the same source. So is it music that inspires you to create music, or are you somebody that's influenced by literature, art, architecture? Like, where do you find it's sort of like this sort of strange thing that creates in you the output that is music?
Yeah. Well, it's obvious that, you know, you create a kind of bank in your head of melodies and ideas, or associate melodies and ideas to things you've heard before. So obviously listening to music is probably the number one thing that, you know, you can kind of throw into the mix of being creative, because it's so easy. You hear it constantly. It's all around you everywhere you go. It's part of your childhood. People associate time and places with music, because it's always there, or hopefully it is always there. But I definitely do tend to take more of an approach. I really enjoy trying to figure out how this instrument works and figuring out, based, for lack of a better word, based on just music theory, music concept, how we've developed music, in terms of the science behind the theories behind how music is created. I like trying to figure out how it works on the instrument and using that as a place to be inspired. I don't know if that's...
No, you're an analyst. I mean, that's a really powerful thing to be, because a lot of people are more ephemeral, but being an analyst of something, I mean, it's like, it's like building a computer because you tore apart a radio. It's pretty impressive.
Right. Absolutely.
That's great. Felix, go ahead.
And then, of course, obviously, I am definitely influenced by many, many different arts, for sure, both visual and audible. So I'm all around the board,
Yeah, it's amazing. Felix, I can't thank you enough for your time and the conversation. I let people know where they can best connect with your stuff online if they want to find out more about what you're up to and where you're working. And you're doing stuff with Hipster Assassins. So you got a whole bunch of stuff going on.
Yeah, sure, Mitch. So I'm really I'm really bad when it comes to trying to market myself and create this whole thing. But I guess the easiest way is just, if you do FelixPastorius.com, you'll go straight to my music Facebook page. There's a Facebook plug right there, a free one. They don't need that anymore. But that's the closest thing I have to a website, and I keep that pretty updated. And I share most of my gigs, most of my clinics, or whatever I'm doing, what I'm involved with, on there. And I have an Instagram. Those are the closest things. I love Instagram a lot, just because it's the closest thing to my visual interpretation.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're a big photography guy. I love that. It's great.
Yeah. Go
That's great, Felix. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, man, Mitch, thanks for having me.